afternoon, everyone. We are really glad that you could join us for today's session, talking about Business Central and NAV year-end process. Just looking at our registration list, I think all, if not all, almost all of you are already on Business Central, so definitely focus there. A couple quick housekeeping tips for you, just because we get these questions a lot. Yes, we are recording. Yes, you will get that recording. Usually with Teams, it's quick enough that you'll probably actually get an email with the recording later today even. And also, just because we do have about 50 or so people on the call today, you are on mute. However, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put those either in the chat or there is a Q&A feature on Teams as well here. And we'll do our best to get to those during the presentation. If not, we'll follow up with you afterwards if needed as well. And then I know that Riley's got a slide, I believe, at the end that's got her contact information. If you come up with a question later, like, oh, wait, I need to know this little piece, then that'll be in the recording that you see as well at the very end there. Speaking of Riley, our presenter today is Riley Tenwall. She has been with Boyer for about 1.5 years now, but has been working with Business Central for quite a bit longer than that. She is also a licensed CPA, so she knows very well how to make sure that you're closing out the year very cleanly, making sure you're doing everything properly, getting all those little details down pat. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave it over to Riley.
So yes, I'm Riley Tenwall, CPA, and then I'm the Fractional Accounting as a Service Manager at Boyer. So that means anything from fractional controller services like budgeting issues and management and helping with complex journal entries to bookkeeping stuff like just booking your everyday transactions. So just a little bit about me there so we can get started. Today, we're going to go over first the health check and from ERP Connect Consulting. We'll go over how to download that and then use it in your system, not only at year end, but you can keep it because it's free. Tax adjusting entries, review 1099 reporting for 2024, and then how to close the accounting period, run the close income statement journal entries, and post year-end closing entries in BC because I know it can be different. So first things first is outside of just being able to close, the information needs to be there. This is probably the number one thing I see when sometimes people go ahead and close it and then they come maybe in February or something like my reporting doesn't look right. And it's normally because something in this process was missed. So you want to make sure you post all necessary journal entries, that's bank transactions, expenses, and then any depreciation, amortization, prepaid accruals, anything that's going to impact your income statement or balance sheet, it will carry over in one way or another if it's not closed out or ever posted. And then you don't want to deal with going back and having to reinstate your financials or anything like that. So it's best just get that done before you even get to closing your books. And then also ensuring that all invoices are appropriately posted or not posted. And that's through that purchase orders or sales orders page. I've seen a lot of those get missed at the end of the year and then they're posted after this process is done or something. So then they're missed and then you have to make adjustments to go back and between years and it gets really complicated. So it's best to just do that before you even start to close the books. And that way you won't spend extra time and money trying to figure out what went wrong. And then just want to make sure all your bank accounts are reconciled as of, we're using 12/31/2024 as our example here. But of course, if you have a different year-end date, that date, but you just want to make sure all those are reconciled. And that includes if you do your credit cards and just make sure that the balances are there because that's going to impact your closing entries that are going to be generated out of Business Central. And if something's not right there and you have to go back, you just have to keep redoing the process. So just make sure that those are done before you even get started on actually closing the books for the year. The first thing I want to go over is the month-end checklist with the health check from ERP Connect Consulting. So it really helps you do that subledger to general ledger reconciliation for the accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory, and bank accounts. And so that allows you to do is the first thing that I do when I come in, or any tax professional, auditor, investor, whoever, they're going to want to make sure, mostly tax people, they're going to want to make sure that your subledgers, so your AP aging, and AR aging match the general ledger balance. So, and what ERP Connect has done is they've actually created a free health check that you can install into your BC environment. So you go to the extension marketplace in the app source page, and if you find the health check from them, you can just do get it now. And there's a YouTube video on any, like, if you have specific user setup things you need, and that's included in this presentation that'll be sent out. But all you need to do is get it now. It'll download in your system, and then once it's downloaded, all you need to do is within your production environment, search and open the health check dashboard. And it's also, they always have like little tickers that you can also search for if you ever forget to, which is nice because they'll come up. But what this does is it will pull up, it'll run and then it'll pull this up. And so what this is a complete analyzation of all of your group balances or subledgers and the general ledger balances. So if anything within here is under the status column, if there's anything that populates in here, that immediately tells you that you need to go back to that first step we talked about, is making sure everything's posted, and also look more in depth in these areas to see if there was probably an incorrect transaction or journal entry posted, and start there, because it's tough to get all the way to sending it out to your tax professionals. That's the first thing they come back with and charge you to tell you that. And so this way you can do it yourself and figure out here. But this is also a great tool to use if you are reviewing the books and the financial reports, or if you're a preparer of the financial reports, because you don't just have to use this at year end, you can use this at any point in the month. So it'll really help you stay on top of, any, especially when you operate a lot of subledgers like the customer ledger, the vendor ledger, inventory. It'll help you stay on top of making sure those are always in balance, because when something someone that didn't know goes in, toggles something wrong off, and it can create a huge issue, and it can go on for months without, if people weren't checking for it, they wouldn't know. I've seen that happen. So it's really nice to be able to have this, and anyone can just look at this, and with that user setup, you can have just certain people see certain accounts, so they don't have to see the full balance of anything. And it's just a really great free tool that I like using now, because the alternative to this is running the aging report in Business Central and then running the balance sheet for the same date in Business Central and then comparing them manually. So, and that's just really time consuming. So this really allows you to save your time and also just stay on top of anything that gets off track, and you get on track a lot faster, and you don't have to pay a tax professional or auditor hourly to do it for you, which is ideal. So once you do that and you can see that everything's in balance, everything's good, you can move on to actually closing the year in Business Central. So we'll go over how to close the accounting period and also create a new fiscal year within the accounting periods table, and then run the close income statement function, and then review and post the year-end closing entries. So the first thing that you want to do is close the accounting period. That happens under the accounting periods table, so you'll want to search that. And then if you go to under home, when you toggle on that, you'll see close year. And then a pop-up comes up and gives you the date range that you're closing. And all close year means is you're just locking the accounting periods of that fiscal year. You can still post if needed. Obviously, ideally, you would have already posted everything you needed to, but if something happens and you need to keep posting, you can still post in that time frame without any issues. It's just locking in those accounting periods. So when you run reports, it defines those accounting periods for you. And then once you press OK, you'll see there's those grayed out boxes from 2023 with the check mark. That's just going to hop down to 2024, and then those will be checked. And that's how you'll know you successfully closed the year in the accounting period function. And the reason we have to do this is because that identifies the ones that are closed for when we run the closed income statement lines to generate the closing entries. So that's why this has to be done before you are able to run that. Once that's done, you'll need to also create a new fiscal year, because if you just try to move on without creating one, you'll be blocked from being able to post journal entries, and really you can't do anything until you create those accounting periods because it'll mess up all your reporting as well. So all you need to do to create the fiscal year is under that same home table, right next to close year, you just press create year, and then these options that you see are automatically generated for you. So it has your starting date. And even though your period end is technically, 12/31/2023, and then 1/31/2024, it still shows like it just starts at 1/1. That's just how Business Central does it. But it's just to start at the beginning of the first day of the first month. That's all that is. And then your number of periods and period length should already be in there. But if not, the 12 and 1M for period length for 1 month. I just identifies that for future financial reporting and how you have your report set up. It'll signify that that is what 1 month looks like in your system. And then that is what it should look like once 2024 is closed for accounting period, just the year is closed, and then 2025 is created. Once you do that, then you're able to move on to actually closing the income statement by generating the income statement lines for the closing entry. So the first thing you do is you search close income statement in Business Central. And what's going to open up is this box right here. And the first thing you want to make sure, this is most of the times it'll be populated for you, but if you've never done it before, most of these will be empty. So you just want to make sure, but it's also just good practice to go through and make sure that everything is accurate, because sometimes someone will have run it for a different period and then you'll be really running the wrong entries. So you want to make sure, first of all, that the fiscal year ending date is the date that you want to end. And then I like to do this in the general journal template. And I think it's best practice to create a general journal batch just for closing entries. And I say that because if you do it in a batch in a different batch that's not designated just for closing entries, so nothing else is going to be in that batch, and someone else is working, and let's say you try to do it in the default batch, you can. And especially if you're the only one ever posting entries, that's a little bit less risk, but most of the time that's not the case. So if anyone had old entries in that default batch and you tried to generate these to that batch, you could end up posting whatever was in there, and it was probably in there and not posted for a reason. So you would end up accidentally posting it, because when we generate these, there's hundreds of lines that come up and things can get missed, and that's just a risk you run doing that. So it's just best to create the journal batch for that. And then document number can be anything you want. In this example, I just have it as year-end 2024 closing. And then you select your retained earnings account through this drop down. And then these are where you have a little bit more options. So post to retained earnings account, I choose balance. What that means is if each line, so sales, cost of goods sold, if you want the balancing account to be retained earnings on each one, which would mean you have, let's say we have 100 lines that we're closing for income statement lines that we're closing retained earnings, 100 lines would be posting to your retained earnings. That's if you select detail. If you do balance, what that's doing is you just have one line for the full balance or your net income from 2024 that will be posted retained earnings. And then each individual line, so sales, cost of goods sold, that'll just be their own line as well. I recommend that just because when you get into posting multiple lines to retain earnings, tax people, auditors, they don't like seeing that because they want to basically go in there and make sure things aren't being posted to that account for the most part. And if there's 100 lines blocking it up, it'll take them more time to review, you more time to review. So unless you need it that way, which sometimes you do, I recommend using the balance there. And then the posting description, that's just automatic. That's just what comes through. And then business unit code, that's for if you have a company group structure, that makes it so it will specify the business unit code in the column that you are closing, if that's applicable to your company. And same for dimensions, except for I would always want to select all of the dimensions on here, because if you miss one, what's going to happen is your general ledger on the surface will be okay and everything will be closed properly. But if a dimension does not get closed between, we'll say 2024 and 2025, when you go and run the income statement for 2025, that customer class dimension, if it wasn't closed, it's going to be way overstated, because however much, however many expenses were included in there weren't closed in 2024. So it'll still carry over to 2025 like it would in the balance sheet. So it'll really skew your reports. So make sure that all of these get selected. And then inventory period close, that we don't have inventory in this example, so I have it toggled off, but that just means it indicates whether an inventory period is closed to any changes in inventory values, meaning you can't go back and post invoices to 2024, which you shouldn't. But if the nature of your business is sometimes that happens, then I would keep that also toggled off, because if you don't want that blocked off. But best practice would be to have that toggled on, because you're not going to be posting anything else to 2024 once you're at this process. So once you get all of those filled out, you'll select OK. And when you select OK, you will need to then go yourself, search up the general journal and open that, and we'll get there. But just to note, when you use an additional reporting currency in Business Central, and you would know if you did, it's in your general ledger setup. Instead of when you press OK, you go to the general journal and get to review those entries, it posts automatically. I'm not sure why Business Central chose to do that, but that's just how it works. So be careful if you are doing that. Again, these entries are provided to you by the system. They're automatically generated, so there's not really errors in them, but we'll get to it in the next slide. You will see that there's going to be things that maybe you'll catch that you should have done or someone on your team should have done, and you'll catch that, expense account looks too high or too low, and you won't get that chance here. So just to note that can happen. So if you don't use additional reporting currency, what will happen is that window, you'll press OK and it will close. And then you'll need to look up the general journals and then go to your year-end batch that we created. And what you'll see is just all the entries that we just generated. And you'll see the posting date has a C in front of it to indicate it's a closing entry. And everything's in line, and you'll see your retained earnings. Like I said, it's the whole balance of everything that's being closed out. And that's when we selected that balance option in the window. And you can go ahead and post this. And I do want to note that if you find something that needs to be adjusted after you post this entry, you can, as long as your general ledger setup, you haven't blocked off the dates, you can go back and post. So for example, if we realized $100 expense was not posted, but we didn't realize that until after we posted these entries, we would first of all go post the expense. So that's a debit to the expense amount and then credit to the bank. So that means that debit to the expense amount hasn't been closed out. So it will show up in 2025 until it's closed out in this process. You will just repeat just the close income statement portion. So you don't need to close the accounting period again or anything like that. You just need to bring up that window for the close income statement again. And when you press OK, it'll generate just one line. So not everything will come back up. Everything will be posted as it is, and it's not re-included in it. It will only bring up what's changed, what hasn't been cleared out. So that's something that's really nice, because mistakes do happen. So it's nice to have that safety net in case something happens, or sometimes your tax accountants come back months later after you've closed with another entry or something like that. So don't worry, most things can be undone, just like this entry. I don't recommend it, but it can be reversed if you do find there was a mistake later and you just wanted the whole thing reversed. You go and reverse it like any other entry. I would try not to do that, but you can do that. So that is still an option. It's not just a permanent closed forever and you can't go back. But only certain people have that ability, of course, and that's already set up in your system to be able to do that. Once we have all of that successfully closed and we know our books are right, we can move on to actually doing our 1099 reporting. So we're going to go over just the requirements for vendor payments to show on 1099 reports. And the ones I'm going to use in the examples today are the 1099 miscellaneous and 1099 non-employee compensation forms. And then we're going to go over in Business Central the vendor 1099 information report, and then the actual printing of the 1099 forms and just tips that we've picked up over time using this for 1099s out of Business Central. So the first thing you want to make sure you do is know the reporting requirements that you need. Business Central doesn't always, they won't just know who needs what. You will have to make that call, and hopefully you've been doing that throughout the year. But if you have to file the 1099 miscellaneous is more complicated than non-employee compensation. So for each person you pay during the year, at least $10 in royalties or broker payments, allow dividends or tax exempt interest, or at least $600 in rents, prizes and awards, other income payments, medical and healthcare payments, crop insurance proceeds, cash payments for fish or other aquatic life, and then the cash paid from notional principal, contract to an individual, partnership or estate, payments to an attorney or fishing boat proceeds. And then you can use form 1099 miscellaneous to report that you made direct sales of at least $5,000 of consumer products to a buyer for resale anywhere other than a permanent retail establishment. So once you've gone, who needs to be 1099 in Business Central, within Business Central, vendor payments will appear on the 1099 reports that you run, but certain criteria need to be met. First is the total payments made to the vendor must be above the minimum reportable threshold specified on the 1099 form boxes table for that reported year, so for 2024. And then there's certain requirements in the vendor ledger entries to make sure that when we run those reports that I'm going to show up here, that they are filled out correctly, because if they're not, they won't populate, and so you will have inaccurate 1099s. The first is the invoice. In the vendor ledger entry must have a 1099 amount entered as a negative number and a 1099 code. In the next slide, I'll go over what that looks like when it's correct so you can see it. Same with the 1099 code must be an actual code, like you'll see it in the next slide, but MISC 07 or NEC 01. So for the certain kinds of codes you have, they actually need to be filled out. If they're just the header codes, it's not going to work. And then the applied entries, they must have the document type. It has to be an invoice, and then that posting date has to be within, the year being reported, which is 2024. So we just want to make sure that if an invoice was maybe posted 12/31/2023, but you find out that's actually wrong, it should have been the year before, that's where we would need to fix that there. And I'll show you how we wouldn't need to change too much. But so this is the vendor ledger entries. How we get there is you search for your vendors, or you go to your vendor page, and then you'll search for the 1099 vendor that you're looking for. And then to open this up, you go to the vendor tab drop down, and then you'll select vendor ledger entries, and then that will get us here. So once you're here, we want to first check that the posting dates for these amounts in the IRS 1099 amount column are within 2024. And then we'll want to make sure that the document type is an invoice, and that's with the ones that have 1099 amounts, we'll make sure that the document types are invoices. And then we want to make sure that they also have 1099 codes on those that are, like I said, it can't just say NEC for non-employee compensation. It has to be like -01. It has to have a real code associated with it. And then something unique about this view is traditionally, and with anything else in this view, when you press edit list, you can't just change the amount of an invoice. We know that if we're all on VC, but you can, when you press edit list, you can change what it says in the IRS 1099 amount. So if you were to find something that either shouldn't or should be there, you can change that here because it doesn't have a general ledger impact, the 1099 amount. Either way, that amount was posted. So all that closing information that we just did still stands and it hasn't been changed because that's just in the 1099 amount column. That's something I really like about this function is it allows us to change it because sometimes things do get missed, especially in this process with everything going on. But once we get it to this point where we've gone through and we think we got everything, I like to run the vendor 1099 information report out of Business Central. What this does is it allows us to see every single 1099 code and amount used this year. And that way we'll know what we need to run for who, first of all, for actually printing and filing the 1099 reports, but also it'll give us a better view to see if maybe we went through some and we forgot that they were there, we didn't know, and so we didn't look in the right vendor. It'll bring it to you and you can go back to that vendor ledger entry page I just showed you and edit it in that specific vendor if you need it. And so to get to this vendor 1099 information report, you go back to that vendor's view, just the general view, and then you go to reports, and then you go to the general dropdown, and then you want to scroll all the way down to vendor 1099 information. And when you click that, this parameters box will pop up. And in this case, I just filtered for my example vendor, but if you were to leave that number field blank, it's going to populate with all of the applicable vendors that would come up in here. And then same with the date filter, because you're doing 1099s, you don't want to accidentally include something too early. So make sure that you're only including the correct date parameters. So in this case, just all of 2024. And then once you press print, this is what that will look like. So you'll see here the 1099 information. You can see the date filter. And this way you can send this to anyone if you need someone else to do it for you. They'll know it gives you, this is the vendor number and name. This is the 1099 code that was used in the description, and then the 1099 amount associated with that code that was used. So when you would run this, and if there were any vendors included in here or not included in here, this would let you know, and then you can go back and change it before actually doing your 1099 filings, just to make sure you covered everything, covered all your base and covered everybody before going ahead and processing stuff and making sure that it's accurate from here, because you'll also be able to catch if an amount doesn't look correct to you or there's too many, you'll see that within this view. And then when you actually want to print your 1099 report, you go to that the vendors view, and then you'll go to reports again, and then go to the general drop down again. And then you'll go all the way down and you'll see vendor 1099 miscellaneous and vendor 1099 non-employee compensation. So in this case, we're going to do NEC because that's what our example is. So I click that one. This is the parameter box that gets populated. You'll want to put in your calendar year, and then you want to filter by the vendor you want. So you will need to do this for every vendor and then every type. So vendor 1099, non-employee compensation. But if for some reason a vendor had both kinds, it usually doesn't happen, but if it did, you would have to do it for both. So you have to run two for one vendor, but in general, you'll just run whatever one's applicable for that vendor, and you'll need to print that one for them. And then in this case, I just had the toggled on for test print since we're not actually printing it and don't actually want the information to show here. But when you press print, this is what comes out. And so that's what you file for your 1099s. So we have some 1099 tips and tricks. The main issue we see, and that's probably with anything, is data issues. A lot of the times there's missing 1099 codes and amounts on those vendor ledger entries. So it's really knowing which vendors need it and then running that 1099 information report will really help you narrow down what needs to be done there. And then really it's a lot of the time it's timing, because if you start verifying now in December, once filing comes around, it's not going to seem like such a mad task, because this is something you can do now, maybe not for the whole year if there's still things that need to be done the last half of the month or for the year, but the earlier the better, and just implement maybe steps in your process to make sure this is happening more often than not. But if it hasn't happened this year, I would start now by verifying the data and making sure that there hasn't been anything historically posted that's incorrect. And then there's also, if everything's correct, there's also BC functionality issues that we've seen come up. And the biggest thing is the form alignment issues. And for that, I would start testing right away in early January once you know everything's in, and making sure just that the forms align and that report layout. And then make sure your printer driver is good and print using actual size out of BC. Other than that, there's other year-end reports in Business Central that are really important for closing the year and also getting all the right information out to your auditors, tax people, investors. And a lot of that happens right away at the end of the year. So you want to make sure you're prepared. And a lot of the times you don't want to run into inaccurate reporting. So it's really important to go through this now and make sure that you're not missing anything. So when you go and hand anything off to them, you made sure you included everything properly and nothing was missed over the year, because or else they're going to charge you for their time to tell you it was wrong. So the first one I want to go through is just your financial statements. You all have them and know how to use them, but there are some things I've seen people miss at the end of the year, which is really important, especially like I said, when you're handing it to auditors, tax professionals, investors, because if there's something that looks like it's not tying out, they're going to think they're wrong, even if it might just be something missed. So the biggest thing I see is ensuring that any newly added general ledger accounts have been added to any existing financial reports in Business Central. So this means if you added a new expense line general ledger account in the chart of accounts during the year, you might not have gone then to the income statement in the financial reports and updated that. So you'll want to make sure you go into the income statement, edit the row definition, and then add in that line that was added during the year. That's the top thing I see missed, is mostly anyone who reviews your financials or looks at them or is trying to file your tax off them. They first make sure that they tie and foot. And if you're missing an account in there, one, they're going to charge you to tell you that. But also they're going to then kind of question if they're even valid, when really you just missed, there's just one line missing, because the end will tie because it's pulling into every single line. But if you're missing just like one account in there, that's what I see a lot of the times. People come back and they're not sure what they're missing because something was added during the year and they didn't know. So that's something to look out for. And same thing goes if you added any fixed asset accounts, bank accounts, or prepaid accounts in the general ledger line. So any GL account in the chart of accounts, because you'll then need to go in and update the balance sheet report and the row definition for the balance sheet. And you'll want to go ahead and add those in as well. And then after you add those in, you also want to make sure that you include those new lines in any formulas that are in there. I see a lot of people miss that too, because they'll add the line, but they didn't update the formula. So it's still not being pulled in. So when someone goes to review it, whether that be an auditor or a manager, they just see that it foots at the bottom, but doesn't tie to the top, or the top ties, but the bottom doesn't tie to that. So you just want to make sure you hit everything for any new GL accounts added, because it'll really impact your financial reporting at the end of the year. And there's so much going on at that point that you want to make sure that these are in line, because these are the base of all of your year-end procedures. And then you also want to make sure that if you use any other reports that include these kind of accounts, like statement of cash flows, special revenue reports, anything like that, you'll want to make sure you go in and add those as well in the financial reports, because they don't update automatically, so you'll miss those as well. So you just want to make sure you go through everything. And then there's also the customer and vendor statements in Business Central. Some people don't know this, that it can do this, but you can actually print out your vendor account. I'm going to use vendor in this case, but the same report is available for customers. But you can print out a vendor account detail that'll show every single invoice and payment that was received during the year for them. And that way, I know at the end of the year, there might be some stuff still outstanding on someone's balances. And so you'll be able to provide them a report like that will show them what you have and haven't received. And it just makes it easier on everyone's side instead of going back and forth. So the way you get that is go to that same vendors page. And for customers, you go to the same page just for customers. And you go to reports, general, and then there's the vendor account detail, and then it's customer account detail in the customers. And that will print out a report for you. And then in here, you want to show the individual balance. So you want to just want to make sure you filter the vendor number for the only person you want to send it to, or else it'll populate everything that you've gotten and it's not helpful. And then same with the date filter, if you're talking about the same dates. And this is what that looks like. And it just lists out everything you would need to get those out. And that same view I just showed you here, that's also where you get your aged reports. So aging AR, aging AP, that's what we talked about at the beginning with that health check. It's looking at those subledgers and those balance like we ran it, but a lot of the times you're going to have people ask you for those when they're reviewing your financials. So that's where you get those in the same place. It's that reports general table and the drop down that has everything you'll need to see. And those are all the Business Central reporting items I have for you. I'm going to pass it on to Mike now.
Awesome. Thank you, Riley, for sharing that great information. As we're all aware, going through our year-end or month-end process can be a little bit daunting. So we wanted to make sure that you guys are all aware of different services that we do have available to assist you in this process. So as Riley stated there, she is what we call a FAAS consultant, which is our Fractional Accounting as a Service. So we do have allow for part-time accounting, as well as some of these year-end processes that you go through. If you're looking for a little bit more proactive approach, we do have our Foundation Plus program that's available to our customers, and that also includes some fast time of Riley's included within that program to utilize that. And then we do have some ultimate support plans available from more of your traditional break fix, as well as the FAST program as well. So a couple of different options there that you can utilize if you're looking for a little bit more of that dedicated resource approach versus our traditional support that's available to you today. So just to talk a little bit about the Fractional Accounting as a Service. So this, as Riley stated, she is a CPA. So instead of you having to go find somebody, or maybe you're a controller and you need a little bit of help, this is where you can rely on Riley's expertise. She's not only a CPA, but she also is a Business Central consultant. So she understands the software, and that's a unique value add to our organization there. And as we go through this program, this is where Riley will partner with you to make sure that you guys do have some goals set up of what you're trying to accomplish within the program. So this is a great way for if you're bringing on a new controller, or as we kind of stated, it's an extension of your team to help you guys go through these month-end and year-end processes and make sure that you feel comfortable, with those processes within Business Central, especially as they've released their wave releases. So new functionality comes in. So maybe you want to start utilizing the AI process within Copilot. That's something that we can definitely help you out with within that process as well. Just so that you are aware, we're going to do a little bit of year-end discounts here for you. So we do have some offerings out there. So it's something that you do need to sign up by the end of the year, but we are offering $250 off of our Foundation Plus offering, as well as if our prepaid plans of support. So allow you to get a little bit of discount before the end of the year. We understand, budgets might be tight here towards the end, but if you guys really need that assistance, here's an option for you guys to take advantage of. You can reach out to Caden, who's our existing kind of our client care sales rep, as well as myself, and we'll be more than happy to assist you in discussing that further or getting you a contract so you can start taking advantage of those offerings that we have available to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys so much for being with us today. Like we said, yes, you will get a copy of this recording, and that, of course, has these emails as well if you want to reach out to us, have any additional questions that pop up as you're going through the year-end process. Best of luck. Have happy holidays.